The Oklahoma Commission on the Status of Women welcomes you to the panel discussion on human trafficking in Oklahoma. A couple of our panelists referred to the white paper on human trafficking, which we drafted in collaboration with our subject matter expert. Now, one of the recommendations on that white paper is that we need to support legislation that promotes the prosecution of perpetrators of human trafficking, as well as those who buy the services. Oklahoma should change the labor trafficking statute of limitations from 3 years from commission to 3 years from discovery immediately. In addition to that recommendation, are there other Oklahoma statutes that should be revised for a better system of prosecution and justice?
And I will try not to monopolize this topic, but yesterday I was informed that we had asked for the statute to be changed from 3 years from discovery instead of 3 years from commission of the crime for both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Mm-hmm. Yesterday we were told that the subcommittee had tabled that until next session, that it is still live, it is still doable, but it probably won't occur this session. Mm-hmm. But that will change sex trafficking and labor trafficking, giving the service providers an opportunity oftentimes to identify a victim who hasn't disclosed for several years due to trauma issues and like.
Does a victim of human trafficking self-identify as a victim of a crime and ask for help immediately? If not, why?
That's a complicated question because I think it depends on the victim. In my experience, is most victims are not self-identifying. It's being recognized by people who are trained to know the signs, and then they are asked questions that would lend to them being able to safely disclose. So most are not identifying themselves as victims, and certainly not as a victim of a crime. It's certainly more of an assault or something that is even super complicated in their understanding of what has happened to them. So that is my experience, that no, most do not self-identify.
My experience is sometimes we will see them come in for other crimes. For example, they may show up to get a sexual assault exam, and during that time after we ask questions, they are able to come forward and say that they've experienced trafficking. But most do not come forward with that because, frankly, most do not identify themselves as people who've experienced it. Mm-hmm. Because it doesn't fit into that narrative that we have so often in this community of somebody being taken and travel across the country and being trafficked. It doesn't fall into that narrative, so they don't see themselves as being victimized that way.
Lucy made the point that African Americans and Native Americans are disproportionately trafficked. Why is that?
So I think that some more research is needed, but that's the researcher in me. But I think there are a lot of compounded vulnerabilities and systematic vulnerabilities that impact those populations, whether it's access to healthcare, access to financial resources, access to housing. I mean, I could go on, but I think it's a lot of different systems all kind of coming together. I would love to see more research on that, though.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was going to say, I think it always goes back, not always, most of the time goes back to vulnerabilities and how vulnerable the person is. And I would agree to exactly what Lucy said. I think you see a lot higher vulnerability indicators in those populations.
We know that he didn't live in Oklahoma, but why do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein was able to victimize children for so long?
I mean, we understand that a lot of abuse can occur out of power and control and coercion. Mm-hmm. Jeffrey Epstein held a high, very visual, out front, powerful position, and coerced these young girls into thinking that he could offer them a life of fame, money, so forth. And we know, well, from what we've been shown, the evidence shows that he really sought out and preyed upon vulnerable young women who were from, foster care, were the ones who were the loners in schools and so forth. And so he even coerced them into seeking out people that he could further victimize by preying upon their vulnerabilities in their mental state.
All right.
I agree with everything Leslie said, absolutely. And I think that a few of the things that we've said today go to this as well. Mike was talking about the need to educate youth about their value. We've talked so much today about the need for education about how human trafficking recruitment can look. Something we've talked about at Dragonfly is that his methods of recruitment weren't that different from what we see from anybody who we serve, and the way that a trafficker who's just exploiting one person might have used the same exact recruitment methods. It's just that Jeffrey Epstein just had so many more resources, and so it looked opulent, but he wasn't that tremendously creative. But you see also the need for understanding what human trafficking really looks like. It's like misdirection. If we think it only looks like this over here, then we miss all of these people who are being trafficked. But I think Lori Gonzalez just mentioned it. If they don't fit into our little box of expectations, then people just might not even intervene in their lives. So I think this is great discussion and the need for just more human trafficking awareness.
A couple of you alluded to the efficacy of a trauma-informed approach. What exactly would that look like?
As a faith-based initiative that's not certified by the Attorney General's office, we've found that a lot of well-meaning people can do an incredible amount of damage. And there has to be policy and procedure, and even for us attracting hundreds and thousands of people around issues of social injustices, if they don't understand the complexities of neuroscience, and if they don't understand the do's and they don't, there's a huge difference between what's really safe and what's felt safety. That if we don't really monitor and if we don't do things with excellence on the forefront, then we can cause a lot of harm and a lot of damage in well-meaning initiatives. And so for us, with anyone working with, we call them our friends from hard places, whether they're homeless or just at risk or happen to have ended up trafficked or they're prostituting, it's just critical that do's and don'ts are established, that we understand trauma and at least an overview of the complexities of trauma, and really good structure and oversight is put into place for people to actually have access to people who are vulnerable or more harm and damage can be caused.
Yeah, I would just like to add on to what she said. Very great response, Lori. I think the word itself, trauma-informed, speaks to the need to understand trauma and the effects of it, and also understanding how not to further victimize. I say it all the time here, I know you have good intentions, but this is an instance of when helping hurts, because we don't truly understand. We can ask questions of a victim that is actually victim blaming without even realizing it. And so having a true understanding of a victim-centered approach and how to interview and not interrogate and things like that. You have to have a real understanding of trauma and how it manifests and how it can even manifest years down the road. There's no linear approach to what trauma is going to look like in a victim. And so each victim's trauma may manifest differently, and understanding that, as she mentioned, the neurobiology of trauma on the brain, understanding that so that you can cater your approach to that specific victim and their trauma.
As a couple of you pointed out, currently there are 3 certified human trafficking agencies in Oklahoma. What is the statewide task force doing to promote and mentor the development of certified services in the other quadrants of the state?
The task force meetings actually occur at the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office is the group responsible for certifying those programs. The sort of rule of thumb has been for the past decade that if you are actually desiring to help human trafficking victims solely with a hands-on approach, not theoretically or through education or through any of that, but actually physically handling victims of human trafficking. That the law has always been that you shall be certified.